So yesterday, I was supposed to do the review video for the simulated match that happened in match week number 10, but I had to delay it to today because today is finally the day my Minnesota United authentic jersey has arrived. This was supposed to arrive last week, but apparently FedEx decided to delay it a week before they ship it here. And then yesterday, when I thought I was going to get it, they basically said that they arrived at my local shipping facility late, so that they have to ship it tomorrow instead. But, since we are at a time where we unfortunately have to deal with this pandemic, and we know for a fact that when it comes to shipping, most of the time you're not going to get things on time, especially right now when we're dealing with a pandemic. So I will forgive them in terms of this whole issue, but at the same time, I'm unfortunately going to have to delay this video because I really want to show off my Minnesota United authentic jerseys that I got, which is the first one that I got for the new 2020 MLS jersey that have just released a couple of months ago. And, I do like this jersey. I mean, the only thing I will complain is that I feel like this jersey looks too baggy, and that even though I bought a medium size for this jersey, it felt like it's a large side, and that again it feels a little bit baggy. And also I bought this on Adidas, which cost around $91 when I got it because it was 30% off. And the only problem with buying MLS jersey off of Adidas is that they don't come with the badge on its sleeves, even with the authentic one. So probably going to have to go to Allianz Field once this pandemic is over and go there to the team store and probably ask them if they can put that 25th anniversary MLS badge on me, and I'll prove to them that this is an authentic jersey, because right here, not quite sure you can see it, but it says here 2021 authentic licensed product, and this basically just proved that this jersey that I got was not a Chinese knockoff, and I actually got it from Adidas. But that being said, I am actually now going to move on and talk about the games that has happened, because this is going to be a relatively long video, since once again we have to do a review video where we're not only going to cover the weekend's game, but also the midweek games. And this week we had 4 midweek games, 11 weekend games, which means we have 15 games to review. So with that being said, let us get started in terms of talking about the first game. And the first of 4 midweek games that has happened, which is between Montreal and Orlando City, which ends in a 2-2 draw. And this was really a game of two halves, where Montreal looked like they were by far the better team in the first half, and it kind of showed when they score first in the 17th minute from Bojan to give a 1-0 lead. Then Taidia, of course, doubled the lead in the 38th minute to make it 2-0. But then out of nowhere, Dom Dwyer got one back for Orlando City, and really that was the first shot on goal Orlando City has. And Orlando City was just sleepwalking in the first half. It didn't look like they were going to show up for this game. But then after they score that goal, they pretty much dominate the rest of the way. And I'm not quite sure, is this just Orlando City kind of give a wake-up call that, they can come back from this game, or the fact that Montreal is doing what they always do, which is if they do potentially have a lead, they'll park the bus and try to grind out a result. And, they did a great job trying to notify Orlando City, and that Orlando City in some way in this game, especially in the second half, kind of looked like an Orlando City team from previous year, where they had a bunch of chances and they just could not put it away. But eventually they did put it away in the 77th minute from Benji Michel, and even after that, Orlando City continued to dominate. Montreal was just holding on for dear life, and the good news for Montreal is that they were able to hold on for dear life to get a point, and Orlando weren't able to find that crucial third goal to come back from 2-0 down. But either way, I think both teams will be happy with this result. I mean, for the impact, you started to see a little bit more improvement from them after they just had a horrendous April and late March. While for Orlando City, they definitely did not play well at all in this game. I was gonna say that this was one of the worst game that Orlando City had played this season, but then I remember they lost 4-1 to FC Cincinnati, and that was the worst game that they have played. But at least they salvage a draw out of this game, and that they do keep a certain pace in terms of the top part of the Eastern Conference. But moving on in terms of the next match, and speaking of top spot, that's where Minnesota is. And I forgot to mention that in this alternative simulation world, this is the winner jersey, because this team, Minnesota United, is at the top of not only the Western Conference, but also the Supporters' Shield standing, and it's not even close whatsoever. And in this game against Columbus, they continue to show their dominance by doing something that pretty much is the reason why they are the best team in the league, which is they just score enough to win a game, and their sturdy defense basically just completely shut down opposition attack. I mean, in this game against Columbus, where the only goal of this game was from Kevin Molino, who's really been one of the guy that has been scoring key goals for this team. But it's also the defense, where I don't think they even allow Columbus to have a shot on goal in this game. That's how dominant this defense is, and something tells me if this Minnesota team is going to win Supporters' Shield in this alternative simulation world, something tells me that an MVP will actually not go to a goal scored, but more to a defensive player. And it's been a long time since we ever had a MVP in the league that is a defensive player, but you could definitely argue that this might be the year that is the case. And if I had to go with an MVP for that defense, which is not easy to choose because most of them are pretty good, I'm just going to go with Iko Para because, he won the defensive player of the year. And not only this year, he's even better in this alternative simulation world, but he's MVP caliber level with the way that he's anchoring this back line. And let's also not mention, he has scored a couple of goals for this team and have looked lethal in the aerial battle too. So yeah, I think he could potentially be an MVP not only to this team but also to this league, and become one of the rare defender to actually win the MVP award if he keeps this up. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is the battle of inconsistency. So the reason why I say this is the battle of inconsistency is both of these teams has been very inconsistent in terms of the world of simulation, where it seemed like when one of these teams are able to get a victory, the very next game they probably will not get a victory and probably will lose the game. And if you actually look near the bottom of the board, you will realize that inconsistency is once again evidence, where despite the fact New England did win this game and that Gustavo Bo did score the only goal in the 45th minute to give them a 1-0 lead and eventually the winning goal of this game, they would end up in the very next game laying a big egg to an opponent, which I will talk about, and TFC would eventually bounce back in the weekend matchup. I mean, that's why they're some of the most inconsistent team, and that's why it's called the battle of inconsistency, where, if you are a team that is inconsistent, then you better hope that you potentially lose this game, so that at least you give your fans hope that the very next game you'll make sure you win that one, because that's how the pattern of both of these teams has gone through. But moving on, in terms of the next match, from the battle of inconsistency to the battle of the bottom feeder. So in this third wheel derby, and I think this is the first time this has ever happened in terms of all my time doing reviews of the simulated match, we actually had a 0-0 draw. And it's only fitting that the first ever 0-0 draw that I get to review out of all those simulated matches that I've reviewed came in this game between the Quakes versus Vancouver. Because, both of these teams are at the bottom of the table. Both of these teams are having horrendous season. And you probably will know that when both of these teams are facing each other, either it's going to be an absolute crapshoot in terms of the defensive display, or nothing really happened. And in this case, nothing really happened. And I definitely will want to give my condolence to all the neutral that actually watched this game and that feels like they just wasted 90 minutes of their life watching this one. And I also want to express my frustration as a Quakes fan, knowing that this was probably one of the most beatable opponent we have at home, and we couldn't even get the job done. And for the Whitecaps, I guess they'll be happy the fact that they got a point, which is something that hasn't come easy nowadays. But at the same time, this was probably the easiest opponent they face on the road, and yet they cannot get all 3 points in it. But the bottom line is, nobody wins in this game, and everybody is very upset the fact that this game the result of this game is a 0-0 draw. And all I have to say is, let's hope we can just move on into the next match and just forget about what we just witnessed in this game between the San Jose Earthquakes and the Vancouver Whitecaps. But with that being said, speaking of which, let's move on into the next match, which, believe it or not, was also involved the Vancouver Whitecaps. And unlike the Whitecaps got a point out of the game against the Quakes on the road, they had no such luck in this game against TFC, and that in this all-Canadian affair, this was more like a one-sided Canadian affair. Erickson Gallardo scores in the 11th minute for Toronto to give them a 1-0 lead, followed by Alejandro Pozuelo 6 minutes later to double their lead to 2-0. Marky Delgado then scored in the 78th to make it 3-0 in favor of TFC, before Patrick Mullins, yes, as I mentioned last week, in this alternate simulation world, the off-season transfer window did not exist. So most of the players that went to another team during this off-season transfer window, that did not happen in this alternative world. So in this world, Patrick Mullins never went to Atlanta, and he stayed with TFC, and he's able to score the 4th goal in this game. And you know, when you concede a goal to Patrick Mullins, you know your team is bad. And in this case, for Vancouver, they just got absolutely steamrolled by a TFC team that, while they've been inconsistent in this game, at least when they are playing some easy team and probably just an automatic 3 points against Vancouver, they are able to show up and get all 3 points. But yeah, speaking of bad team, the Portland Timbers is one of those teams that is not having a good season, especially at home. And their home form woes continue against the Galaxy as they lost 2-1 to them. Although, I will say this, Timbers fan does have a right to be angry about this game, because there were not only a couple of controversial calls that went against them, but it also changed the result of this game. And I knew if this was going to be a 2-1 win for the Galaxy, yeah, there's going to be a lot of people that's going to bring up these controversial moments. But first of all, the Timbers did score first in the 11th minute from Felipe Mora, and of all the player that has underachieved for the Portland Timbers, surprisingly, Felipe Mora is not one of them, and that he's actually having a very decent season with the Portland Timbers. But unfortunately for the Timbers, as we have seen many times before, whenever they score first at home, once they conceded the next goal, they eventually will concede another, and they will just have no answer to trying to come back in the second half. And it happened again in this game, and it actually happened very quickly, where they gave up the equalizer just 6 minutes after they got the lead from Alexander Katai to tie the game up at 1 apiece for the Galaxy. Then this is when the controversy happened, and this is when a lot of Timbers fans will say that this goal should have never happened, where Giancarlo Gonzalez scored in the 4th minute of stoppage time in the first half. But obviously Timbers fan will say that goal should never happen, because there was only 2 minutes of stoppage time, and for whatever reason the referee decided to swallow the whistle in his mouth and allowed more than 2 minutes of stoppage in this game. And you know, I have seen before where we have games where we're supposed to maybe have like this amount of stoppage time, and there's also a reason why it's called. There's a minimum of that much stoppage time, because the referee always have the discretion to maybe add a couple more minutes depending on if there was an injury that has happened during stoppage time, which was not the case in this game. But I also kind of feel like it was kind of a little bit ridiculous, the fact that not only we had 2 more minutes of stoppage time than it's supposed to be in the first half, but it almost like we played double the amount of stoppage time that was awarded, and there was a chance for the referee to blow his whistle before. the Galaxy was on an attack and they won a corner out of that. But instead, that did not happen, and the Galaxy would end up scoring. And the other controversial moment happened in this game was in the second half, where Giancarlo Gonzalez, who scored that controversial goal, was also part of this other controversial moment where he looked like he clearly handball a shot from Diego Valeri, but the referee didn't call it. They didn't even go to VAR in this instant, and as a result, Timbers fans are going to be very angry about this result, and that they feel like they just got completely robbed in this, and I don't disagree with that, and that I feel like in some way they were kind of hard done by that. But you know, when you're a team that is not having a great season, all I have to say is that's kind of the luck that you're going to get when you are having a very, very poor season. And for the Galaxy, you know, they might got lucky to get a 2-1 win in this, but this doesn't also change the fact that they're also one of the most inconsistent team this season, and I won't be surprised in the very next match the Galaxy will probably find a way to not win that one. But moving on, in terms of the next match, from teams that is not doing very great to teams that is having a damn well season, that is the Seattle Sounders. So despite the fact that the Sounders did lose their last match in that showdown against RSL, they did recover by winning 3-1 against DC and show why they are a team that is looking to try to defend their crown that they won last season. Nicolas Lodeiro scores in the 31st minute to give them a 1-0 lead. Then it's followed by Miguel Ibarra just 8 minutes later to give them a 2-0 lead. Jordan Morris then scored in the 54th minute to make it 3-0 in favor of the Sounders. And you know at that point when the Sounders are up 3-0, there was no coming back for DC. They did get one back in the 80th minute from Ola Kamara, but again, the Sounders, when they have a 3-0 lead, especially at home, you know they're not going to blow that lead. And they continue to try to chase down RSL and Minnesota in terms of the top spot in the Western Conference. And this win will definitely help that cause. And for DC, you know, it's a frustrating resort for them. But this is what happened when you have to face against a tough team on the road. And that if you're going to be a contender, these are kind of games that you need to kind of show up, and simply DC just did not show up in this game and let Seattle just completely dominate them throughout the 90 minutes. But moving on in terms of the next match, and speaking of dominating over the 90 minutes, NYCFC did exactly that to the Revs, and as I mentioned before, when the Revs won that game against TFC, while that was a good victory for them on the road, it also means that the next match is probably going to be absolutely horrendous from New England. And Lord and behold, that is exactly what happened, where New England completely laid an egg against NYCFC. And NYCFC, all of a sudden, after that poor start that they had in the beginning of the season, it started to kind of bounce back a little bit. Jesus Medina scores in the 25th minute to give them a 1-0 lead. Before in the second half, Keaton Parks would score to make it 2-0 in favor of NYCFC, and Medina score again in the 89th minute to add the cherry on the top to complete a perfect win for NYCFC on the road. And like I said, NYCFC, they're started to kind of come back after that horrendous start that they had in the season. And I kid you not, maybe they're actually above the red line right now. I'm going to have to look at the standings now, because I heard they're probably now above the red line with the way that they have this 3-game winning streak. And especially with how tight the Eastern Conference is, it doesn't take a lot for you to get on a hot streak and you will rise above the table with the way that how tight the Eastern Conference is. And right now, NYCFC is definitely taking the advantage of, after getting a poor start, they have a little mini 3-game winning streak and started to get hot. And before you know it, they could definitely be a team to be right at the spot where we expected them to be in the beginning of the season, which is challenging for the Eastern Conference crown. But that being said, I am now going to be switching boards and look at the last 7 games that happened from this match week number 10 simulated action. But yeah, moving on. is another battle of the bottom feeder derby. This time, it's come from the Eastern Conference between the Redbulls and Columbus, with both teams being in the bottom of the standings. And unlike the Western Conference bottom of the barrel derby between the Whitecaps and the Quakes, where nothing virtually happened in that game and there was no goals, at least this game there was goals. And that this game ended in a 1-1 draw, with goals came in a spell of 6 minutes, with the Redbulls scoring first in the 21st minute from Brian White, and Pedro Santos quickly equalizing the 27th minute to tie the game up at 1 apiece. But I will say this, at least this game there was definitely more action, and that it seemed like both teams were committed in terms of trying to get all 3 points, unlike the previous Western Conference team where it feels like both teams don't even want to attack and just want to get a point out of it. So yeah, at least this one was a little bit more watchable, and that still, if you are a fan that was hoping to see some high scoring action or see some bad mistake throughout these two bottom of the barrel derby we saw this week, then I sadly have to say that did not happen this week. But yeah, moving on in terms of the next match is FC Cincinnati. So Cincinnati, they are playing against the Union, and I thought FC Cincinnati, if there was one team that could cause an upset this week, it would be them, because when they tends to face against team that is near the top of the Eastern Conference, where in this case they're playing against the team that is at the top of the Eastern Conference, that is the Philadelphia Union, I thought they were going to create an upset because that's what they've been doing this season. However, that was not the case for the Union, and they weren't like the other team that unfortunately fall into the trap of FC Cincinnati, and instead they got a comfortable 2-0 win in this game, with Kasper Schmeichel, who has been one of the most lethal goal scorers this season, scoring again in the 12th minute, and then they wrap it up in the 91st minute with Alzinho scoring an absolute screamer, because that's what Alzinho does in terms of scoring amazing goals, to give the Union a 2-0 lead, and that would end up be the final score of this game, as the Union, with a win, they extend that lead over Orlando City in terms of the top of the Eastern Conference. And for FC Cincinnati, yeah, I'm kind of frustrated the fact that they couldn't do what they've been doing the previous two times when they go up with a very tough team. But I think maybe the Union was just a little bit too tough of a task where they can create a bit of an upset, and the fact that they have to play on the road in this game does make it a little bit more challenging than the previous time when they were able to knock out some tough opponent when they are at home. Although when they play against Orlando City, I don't think they actually beat them at home, and instead actually beat them on the road. But either way, this was just a little bit too tall of a task for them to do in order to create a bit of an upset against a top team in the Eastern Conference. But yeah, moving on in terms of the next match. Speaking of top team in the conference, Minnesota, who, as I mentioned, they were the team that is the best team in the league. Well, they once again did their favorite thing in this game, which is win by a final score of 1-0. Although I will say this, Colorado got absolutely robbed in this game, and I think Rapids fan alongside with Timbers fan this week will be absolutely livid with some of the refereeing decision that went against them. And I would even say that this one was even more controversial than the Portland versus Galaxy game, because there should have probably been a sending off. There should have been two sending off that the Loons could have had in this game, and it all started in the 5th minute when Michael Boxall clearly should have been sent off after he made a denial of goal scored opportunity. Don't know how in the world that is not the case. And then just 10 minutes later, Iko Para, who I've been praised that he has been just in an unstoppable force. Well, unfortunately, he showed a kind of a bit of a weakness in this game by conceding a penalty of just such a deliberate handball. And again, I don't know how that's not a red card too. And even though Colorado got a penalty in that, Iko Para should have been sent off in that game. And again, this is coming from a Minnesota fan that's saying that I think think the Loons were very lucky to not go down to 9 men in the first 15 minutes of this game. Obviously, the Rapids missed that penalty. Unfortunately, they hit the post. And then in the second half, they could have maybe had another penalty in the 55th minute when Eichel Parr, who probably should have been sent off a while ago, commit a foul that also looked like should have been a sending off too, but it was not given. And despite the fact that Rapids players were protesting, thinking that should have been a penalty because of how Eichel Parr brought down one of their players, the game remained 0-0 heading in the latter spot, and maybe it looked like this was going to be a 0-0 draw, which I guess the Rapids will take it, consider there was so much things that kind of gone against them. But unfortunately, in the 91st minute, Robin Lehrer decided to just make probably the most unfair thing to do, which is score a goal right at that point, and really just piss Rapids fan even more with the way that, not only they conceded a goal right at the last minute, but the fact that they were just unfairly, the amount of call that is unfairly against them, they absolutely shouldn't have got a loss in this game. But still, if you are a top team in the Western Conference, and if you're a top team in your league, sometimes you get those benefit of the call, and you get that kind of luck involved. And I think for Minnesota, they got very lucky in this game, and I just hope that they don't rely on this as another way to trying to get victory, because if that's the case, I have a feeling a lot of fans are going to really hate Minnesota, which is kind of irony because Minnesota is supposed to be one of the most beloved franchise in the league. But yeah, moving on, in terms of the next match, is Dallas. So Dallas got a 2-0 win against the Chicago Fire. This was also another game I could easily said it's the inconsistent derby, because both of these teams have been kind of inconsistent and mediocre in this game. But I thought since Dallas is playing at home in this game, most likely they're going to win this one, because that's what they've been doing throughout this season. Michael Barrio scored in the 44th minute to give Dallas a 1-0 lead right on the stroke of halftime, before Zdeněk Odronsik, the Cobra, would pretty much put this game to bed in the 81st minute, as Dallas gets a 2-0 victory, and they improve. I think they have got themselves probably now in 6th or 5th place in the Western Conference, while Chicago, mediocrity continue for them, and the inconsistency continue with them, where it looked like they got some momentum in some of the previous game where they get a victory. Now they, of course, lay an egg in this game against Dallas on the road. But yeah, moving on. Speaking of teams that lay an egg, that's what LAFC did in this game against SKC. And I'll tell you what, there should be a lot of concern with LAFC right now, and that something is clearly not right with this LAFC team. I think this is like the 4th straight game where they weren't able to get a win, and this is, I think, the 3rd straight loss that they have suffered for this season. And this time they suffered that loss in the hand of SKC, with Ilya scoring the only goal in the 11th minute. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going on with LAFC, and that, like the Timbers, where I talk about how a lot of those players are underachieving this season, I think LAFC is also a team that has a bunch of underachiever, and you could even argue they themselves probably have a bunch of players that is even more underachieving than some of those Timbers players are doing. And especially Carlos Vela, when's the last time we even mentioned his name? Like, what's happened to him? This is a guy that scored 34 goals this last season, and this season he's in a bit of a goal drought, and the same goes with Diego Rossi, who last season's been scoring a bunch of goals. Now his name is barely mentioned throughout this season. So yeah, something is clearly wrong with LAFC, and that I don't think I would get to a point of this season where I think the panic button might be started to be a reality for this team, and that there should be a little bit of concern of why in the world is this team struggling so much this season. And I think this is now their third home loss this season. They have only had 2 home losses in their first 2 years of existence in the regular season, and now they have more home losses this season than their first 2 years of existence. But as for Sporting KC, they're kind of like NYCFC, where they had a bad run in the previous month, but they're started to kind of rise up, and that now I think if they can continue this good run, they can really get back to where they were in the first 2 games of the season, which is at the top of the Western Conference. But yeah, moving on into the last 2 games of this week is Atlanta versus RSL, and for Atlanta, this was an absolute heartbreaker. They looked like they were probably going to get a point out of this game against RSL, with them scoring first in the 34th minute from Ezekiel Barco before Nick Beasler was able to equalize from a corner to tie the game up at 1 apiece. And as we head late in the game, it looked like both teams was just going to settle for a draw, but Damar Krylak, out of nowhere, was able to score an absolute screamer, and that just completely broke the hearts of the 45,000 fans that was watching this game down at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And yeah, RSL, they continue to show why they are one of the most surprising and one of the best team in the league. And for Atlanta, yeah, they cannot wait until they get Joseph Martinez back, or if they get Joseph Martinez back, because they have really struggled this season as predicted without their goal-scoring king this year. But last but not least, to look at the final game of this weekend action, is the Quakes and the Dynamo, 2 teams that also are near the bottom of the Western Conference. And for once, the Quakes actually got a draw in this game, and I think this might be the first time when the Quakes play twice during a match week, they actually did not lose any of it. They got a 1-1 draw against Houston in this one. Andreas Rio scoring in the 63rd minute to give them a 1-0 lead before Memo Rodriguez tied it up in the 77th minute. And the reason why I say that for once the Quakes did not lose to the Dynamo is that it seemed like for whatever reason, whenever the Quakes play against the Dynamo, they always tends to lose whenever this game is played at BBVA Cup Stadium. Like, it's been a long time since I remember the Quakes able to get something out of Houston when they're playing on the road. So this was kind of a little bit of a surprise, but at the same time, the Dynamo, they are another team that is struggling this season. So I guess there isn't really a lot to be proud of, considering they got a draw out of a team that is struggling. But hey, when you're a struggling team and you're able to get some points, you take it any way possible as a way to maybe spark some hope that you can start to get going. And as I said before, it doesn't take a lot for some of these bad teams to get on a good run and they rise up the table. The Western Conference is a little bit more difficult because it's a little bit more spread out. But if you're an Eastern Conference team and you're near the bottom of the table, don't give up hope yet, because you're probably only a couple of points from going above the red line. And if you can just get a couple wins in a row, you can find yourself above the red line just like that, because of how compact the Eastern Conference is. But that being said, speaking of standing wise, let's us now talk about the standings, as I'm going to switch the boards one last time to talk about the standings of both conferences after week number 10. Alright, so let's take a look at the standings after 10 match week of simulated action, and we start with the Eastern Conference, with the Union still at the top of the Eastern Conference and actually extended their lead over Orlando City after they of course got a victory, and Orlando weren't able to get 3 points against Montreal, as they're now at 22 points with Orlando City at 17 points. And then there is where there is kind of a logjam between third and the very last spot in the Eastern Conference, where there's only 6 points separate between third and 12th, with TFC currently having 13 points, DC United currently with 12 points, FC Cincinnati, Atlanta, and New England all tied at 5th place with 11 points, Montreal and NYCFC tie at 8th place with 10 points. Chicago currently have 9 points, with Columbus having 8 points in 11, and the Redbulls currently bottom of the Eastern Conference with 7 points, but they're only 4 points away from going above the red line. And that, if we continue to have this table jumble up like this for the upcoming weeks, we're going to see a lot of changes in the Eastern Conference. And some of these teams, that is kind of in this jumble up spot, they can either be very nervous, the fact that if they do go on a poor run, they can find themselves quickly tumble down the Eastern Conference, or they're going to be very hopeful because if they can get on a winning run, then they can rise themselves above the red line and maybe separate from this big jumble right here between 3rd and 12th. But whatever it is, if we're going to continue to have resort that, some of these teams at the bottom, if they started to do very well, they could really rise up the table. And if some of these teams are doing very badly at the top of the table, they can fall down and fall below the red line because of how jumbo up it is. Now, in the Western Conference, things is not as much jumbo up, but it's kind of separated by 3 different groups. In the first group, which is the one that is the elite class, the second group, which is the one that is kind of like battling for the final spot in terms of home field advantage, and then we have the terrible group and the one that probably they're not going to make the playoffs this season. So at first, we have Minnesota United, who currently have 29 points and continue to look like they are the class of the league and continue to run it away with the Supporters' Shield standing. With RSL, the closest competitor with 21 points and 8 points back of Minnesota. Then we have the Seattle Sounders currently having 19 points with Dallas, LAFC, and Colorado all tied up in 4th place with 14 points. Sporting KC and the Galaxy currently tied in the last spot of the Western Conference for the playoffs. And this group between 4th through 8th are pretty much kind of like the wild card group where they want to get the last spot in the playoffs, but they also don't want to fail out of the last spot of the playoffs, which is the 8th spot. Then we got the have-nots, which is the Dynamo currently having 10 points, the Timbers and the Quakes currently having 7 points, and then the Whitecaps, who currently owns the Wooden Spoons spot with only 5 points to their name. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for the review of match week number 10 in terms of the simulated match. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of it, and also let me know in the comments below what do you think the standings we have after 10 weeks of simulated match. But yeah, hope you guys enjoy this video, and if you do, make sure you guys hit a like, smash that subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time, and I'll see you next week to see what's going to happen in match week number 11 in terms of the simulated action.